My name is Julie. I'm a classroom teacher based at Creative Secondary School in Hong Kong. And I've created this webinar because I would like us to share collaboratively together about what we know about formative assessment and some strategies that we can use in the classroom. So throughout this webinar, it's just going to be just things that I have come up with myself. So this idea of formative assessment is just something that I've put together. So if you care to read that. So I think there's someone with your microphone, so if you could turn that off, that would be great. Thank you. So I got the impression from the pre-webinar questionnaire that people have a pretty good idea of what formative assessment is about, which is great, which means that we can spend our time focusing on the strategies. So for me, formative assessment is a win-win situation. We win because we know what to do, and the students win because they get to learn as well as they possibly can. So why is it important? Students deserve to have their learning differentiated. Students need to learn at their own pace, and students need to build on what they already know. So we need to find out what they do know. So we need to know their current understandings. We also need to be able to deal with any misconceptions that come up as well. And then obviously formative assessment then informs our next teaching steps. So the formative assessment system. So formative assessment needs to start when we start to consider the next unit. So whatever unit is coming up next, we need to start thinking about the formative assessment that we're going to build into that unit. So the prior knowledge. What do we want our students to know before we start the unit? What do we hope that they know from previous years or from previous units? And what do they understand at the moment? Once we know what they understand at the moment, we can then use that to plan what we do next. And then how will we know if they've understood what we're learning? Well, that's the formative assessment that we do during the lesson. So you can see that it's an ongoing process. Formative assessment just never stops. And we're doing it without really noticing too. So prior to starting the unit, so before I said, what do we want the students to know before we start the unit? And this is what these are going to find out. So what do they understand now? And this can take a whole lesson. And I highly recommend you doing this in groups. So when I do my formative assessment, starting to the units, I want students to communicate, collaborate together to get the best out of every single student. So I always start brainstorming in groups. So I'm going to talk about this template here. So we have this, so what we do is we get a big piece of what's called sugar paper or butcher's paper, or the kind of paper that you put on the back of your classroom as backing paper. And you put one piece of paper down on a table, and you get the students to sit in these 4 positions. Whoops, I forgot I was going to do that. And so the section that they are sat in front of is their section. So they put their names in the corner of the section, and then they brainstorm what they know about that unit. So if my unit, so my next unit, for example, with Form 1 is use of numbers. So if I wanted to know what they know about fractions, decimals, and percentages and how they link together, I would put some prompts on the board. So it's having prompts ready on the board is absolutely vital for any brainstorming. So blank brainstorming is not as effective as giving some prompts, giving keywords, asking students to maybe draw diagrams, examples. I cannot emphasize enough how important examples are in the learning process. So the students have 5-10 minutes. It depends on what year group. So older students I give them longer periods of time, and they brainstorm what they know about that, and they can have a little look and see what other people are in the group, what other people have written in the group as well. Then when the conversation's kind of becoming into a bit of a lull, I get them to turn their pieces of paper around. So all the groups do this at the same time. And then they have a look to see what their next door neighbour's written and have a conversation about what those people have written. I then, after that, so I give them a few minutes to have that conversation, and again, judged by the level of communication that's going on. And then they turn that piece of paper back to their section, and perhaps they can carry on for another few minutes. And then at the end of that session, the rectangle is for their shared knowledge. And their shared knowledge, so if you want, this will depend on how you want to start your unit. If you want them sat by ability groups or by prior knowledge groups, then I recommend that you go in and you set the students into groups, into table groups according to kind of like estimated ability, estimating what you think they're going to know. Otherwise, you'll just get in here what the weakest person knows every time. If you want to work them as mixed ability groups, do your formative assessment as mixed ability groups. So I use this at the beginning of all of my units with all of my classes. And it's great to look back on it. So if you get weak students, they look back on this and compare their things that they do at the end of the unit with what they did on that grid. They can look back and go, wow, okay, I've learned quite a lot. So a pre-quiz is another way. So a pre-quiz, again, I would do that as a group. Doing it on their own is just a little bit demoralizing, perhaps. So then we have one thing that I absolutely love is the agree, disagree, don't know statements. So I have an agree poster on one side of my classroom, I have a disagree on the other side, and I have don't know on the back wall. And I say a statement, and the students have to go to one of those posters. And once they've all decided where they're going to go, and if they don't know where to go, then they should go to the don't know. Sometimes they go, I don't know where I'm going to go. And then the agree people have a little bit of a chat when they get there. The disagree people have a little bit of a chat. And then somebody from the agree group say why they agree with the statement. Someone from the disagree does the same. And then the don't know people then have to go to one of those two. And then I will then tell them who is right. But very often you actually get people from the disagree group go to the agree group, or swapping over. So there's lots of swapping over that can be done. And that can be done at any time. But if there's something specific that you want to know before you start the unit, or as you start the unit, then this is a good one as well. So during the lesson, so we have the big question now. What does your prior curriculum tell you that they should know? So that was prior to starting the unit, and then during the lesson, you need to consider what are the objectives of this lesson. What do you want your students to know? And what do they actually understand now? So we need to know what they understand at the beginning of each lesson. And also we need to understand what they learn, what they are learning as the lesson goes on. So some strategies for this. The mini whiteboards are great little kind of laptop size boards. I get my students to collect them automatically when they come in, and they collect their whiteboard, the whiteboard marker at the same time. Please, if you're going to use this, get some refillable whiteboard markers for the environment. And then they put their answer on their, they put their answer on their whiteboard, and you can see what everyone in your class is then saying. And it's good for students to look around at what other people have written on their whiteboards, because then it's a bit like having a multiple choice question in a test. So they see different answers on different boards and they think, which one should I go for? And generally the people who don't know do actually go for the ones that are the most common, of course. Then we have the think, pair, share. So you ask someone a question, then they work together in a group, in a pair or in a three, and they discuss what they're thinking, and then they can share, and then you pick a group to share their ideas, or two groups to share their ideas afterwards. So absolutely classic. And then we have a Freya model. So this is where you're going to get active. So if you don't have your pen and paper right by you, can you please grab one of those while I get up the next screen? So the Freya model is based on defining something, having the characteristics and the facts, and the examples and the non-examples. So this is one from a science lesson. And so you can use that as a prompt. And I'd like you to think about where you could use the Freya model in your upcoming lesson, or maybe a lesson that you've just done recently. Where could you have used a Freya model, or where could you use the Freya model in a lesson that's coming up? I do recommend having diagrams. I'm a maths teacher. I love a diagram. They speak 1,000 words, as all my students can quote now. So having diagrams and having keywords. Again, the keywords is a massive part of formative assessment because it makes up a massive part of the learning. So get students to highlight their keywords. So here is your blank one. Have just spent a couple of minutes thinking about where you could use your Freya model. So I find the non-examples a really important section in here, because they get doing the counter examples, things that don't work, actually explain a lot of their working. So if I were going to do this for something like explaining what a prism is, then my non-example for a prism would be something like a cone or a sphere. So remember to highlight any keywords that you would like. So basically what you're doing now is kind of like the model, Freya model for your question. So if you're doing this for the very first time, it might take you 2 minutes because you've absolutely got it, or you might need another 30 seconds, a minute. I'm happy to take that if you wish. So if you can just turn on your microphone and just say, I'm okay to move on, or another 30 seconds, please.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Hi, Julie.
You need to mean, rather.
Instead of having examples and non-examples, presumably you can use it to suit your purposes. So I could, if my thing in the middle is PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction, I could have, instead of examples, I could use maybe uses versus non-uses.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great suggestion, because you know the idea is that you're looking at things that do and don't work. So anything that goes along those lines would work equally well. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on because I've not heard otherwise. Okay, so more things that you can use during the lesson. So this is something that we all do, and we all just do it naturally. So don't underestimate the power of having chats with your students to find out what's going on. So this is when, you know, we make the most of where everybody's busy, and instead of sitting down, we have the opportunity to have those individual discussions. Okay, we also have quizzes. Many of you told me that you regularly use quizzes, so we can use quizzes on paper, but we can also use quizzes that are marked automatically. So anything that's marked automatically is brilliant in my book. So the time that we're not spending marking, we're spending that time on planning good formative questions, diagnostic questions that we can gauge the best learning outcomes from. So we're going to have a look at a Kahoot. So before I show you how the Kahoot works and all the things that go with it, what I'd like to do is actually try one out. So if you can pick up your phones and go into your Kahoot app. Okay, I'm going to change my share. No, I don't need to. So, okay, so you can see my Kahoot quiz, right?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So, okay, so this is one I made up for us. So you can host it live, which is what we're going to do. You can also create a challenge. So I'll just very, very quickly show you how this works. So when you set a challenge, you can set a deadline for it. So if you've got students at the moment working on different time zones, or you know, you're not fixing them to the lesson time, you can fix a time like 5 p.m. or something like that. So let's play. So the best thing about Kahoot, and I'm never going to change my mind about that, is the music. So I actually have the pro account. I decided to pay for this, and you can change your music, and there is no way I'm changing the music. So I'm going to turn my microphone down. Okay, so if you can enter this pin. And then when you put your name in, I'll be able to see. So hopefully you should still be able to see this screen. So if someone can just tell me that they can see the screen.
Yes, I can.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I just need to have a look at how many participants I've got. Oh, lots. So you can also play Kahoot individually, or you can play as a group. So you can play individually if you want them to do it as formative assessment. Sometimes you can just do Kahoot as formative assessment and a bit of fun. So although you won't get to know the, sorry, I'm completely distracted by all the names. I'm gonna cover that up. So the students can work in a group for maybe like their house groups. If you want to do a house competition with this, you can have, you can do it in a bigger room and have it up on the screen and have classes together. So you can also have the team mode as well, which is great fun. Okay, so I'm going to make a start now. So we're actually just going to do 3 questions out of these 9. And if all your students answer before they have, before the time's up, the question will automatically end. And you can set different times for different questions. Okay, very good. So formative assessment could have been a test before the real test. So this up here was a plausible answer. So it could have been a test before the real test, but only if some formative assessment, only if that test is going to allow students to then feed back into what happens next, and then do the real test after that. Okay. So second out of 3 questions we're actually going to play. Okay, so hopefully after this webinar, you will definitely know that it's any time before they do the summative assessment. Okay, and then the last question. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so what happens is, I'll just talk through this last question. So this is like a generic formative assessment question. So what happens is when you go into Kahoot, you can choose the formative assessment if you want to do one completely from scratch, which is very rare. And it gives you tips, it gives you ideas. So it gives you a different kind of thing for each question. And then it tells you what kind of things you can put in as the answer. So it leads you through how to create the questions and answers really, really nicely. Okay, so going back to the webinar. So I'm just going to close all those down. Okay. So going back to the webinar. We can, I actually set a challenge for my MY1 class, but we're running short of time. So you can see the link when I send you this out anyway. So you can see all the kind of things that you get out from the Kahoot quiz. So you get out all the answers for all the students, and it also shows you the difficult questions, the questions where students got less than 50%, which is actually really useful because then you can use that in your next lesson. And one of the most important things is to use open-ended questions. So open-ended questions allow us to find out the most about our students. And then at the end of the lesson, we can use these exit tickets. So at the end of the lesson, we need to determine, have the objectives been met? Have the students learned what you wanted them to learn? So we can do some plenary questions. So you can differentiate some plenary questions, and you can give back some exit cards. So I'd like you to now get your pen and your piece of paper again, and I'd like you to think about the lesson that you've just done, or a lesson that you are going to do, and think about an exit card while you do that. So I'm just going to open up this link. And in this link, it has a definition of what an exit slip is. So this is something that you give to your students at the end of the lesson, and they give back before they leave the classroom. So you can have an exit slip to determine knowledge from your lesson. So I'd like you to think of one exit slip that determines whether they've learned a piece of knowledge, and another exit slip to provide for them to provide feedback for you. So open feedback. So I'll leave this one. This one is less obvious. I will leave this one on the screen. So just spend a minute thinking about 2 exit slips for your next lesson. And then a lovely one that I particularly like is, I used to think, but now I know. So this one comes out with some really nice surprises. And then the last one that we're going to look at today is formative assessment strategies that we can look at after the lesson has finished. So these need to follow up on the plenary, and they provide your preparation for next lesson, what you will teach next. So you can have online programs that auto-mark and give feedback for the students where they've gone wrong. So in maths, we have My iMaths. You may have your own in your own subject. But we're going to have a look at Flipgrid. So there's a link to the blog with everything you need to know to start up with Flipgrid. So I'm just going to quickly share with you mine. If you do need to leave after 30 minutes, that's absolutely fine. I will not. I realize I've now got up to my 30 minutes, but we can go longer than this. I actually have a paid for version, so we can go on as long as we want, but I'm hoping to get through this by 4:35. So in your grids, you will see all the different grids that you have for your different classes. I'm just going to go into my youngest student ones. And first of all, they kind of said, had they used Flipgrid before? So we practiced this in the lesson so that they could get used to doing that. So we actually had a little go in the lesson to show them how it works. And just quickly show you one that you can do. So you give it a title. I need to put a picture in there so it looks a bit more mathematical. And then I wanted them to use Screencastify to record it. So I wanted them to describe some four-sided shapes and quadrilaterals. So I wanted to see whether they were using the right language. So making a video is a very quick way for them to use lots and lots of language and for you to very quickly find out whether they have used that language effectively. So it's very time efficient, actually. So if we just go into Josie's briefly.
It has two pair of parallel lines.
So you can see there that she's using Screencastify. So she's and she's using that very well, and she's using the cursor as she goes through.
With 4 straight sides.
Okay, and it comes up with, so she zoomed in on what she needs to know. So, and she talks about it really well. So you can fix this, but generally it has ideas and performance. And so you can give them a score for what they talk about and then how well they actually do the performance. So this is kind of like more about the content, and this is like how well they actually do it. And then you can put an individual comment. So I always say something I like, and then something that they can work on. And then they can comment on each other's as well. So and they can view each other's. So they really like that, especially the younger students. Okay, and then the student view. So they log in all with their Google account. If at any point I'm talking about something and you can't see, just please turn on your microphone and let me know. So when they go in, this is what they see. So they get the instructions and the titles, anything that you use, any YouTube videos or anything like that. And then they, oh, I now have the frozen one. Okay, so, oh, this is frozen because I've then gone past the time that I've allowed this to be open. But normally this is a big green cross, and that's where they put their videos in. So this is what they see. So they can see other people's, and then they can add, then they can start their own video. So people who do it later actually get quite a bit of an advantage. Concept maps are great, particularly at the end of the unit. So linking all those concepts together. So in maths, we could have some formulae, some calculations, some examples, some graphs. So we can link how all of those things link together. And I've put a link to one of the websites there. And then they can just upload some videos into your Google Classroom. So we've been using Loom and Screencastify. Both very user-friendly. It's easy to just do a quick YouTube search on those, although I've put the link for Screencastify. And you can do last year's assessment and mark scheme as long as those answers then lead to something, so some extra learning or filling in some gaps before the students then do the test. So you can do last year's assessment as long as there's some learning before they then do the test after that. They can't just say, oh, I got level 5. I'm happy with that, lovely jubbly. Maybe they could get level 6 if they practice some questions relating to the ones you've got wrong. So you could link those up. So to recap, we can use summative assessment before a unit, during a lesson, at the end of a lesson, after a lesson, which then loops around to become before the next lesson, and so on and so on and so on. So which ones would you try next lesson? And is there anything else you need to know to try this? So are there any questions that you have on something that you could try next lesson, but you don't have all the information yet?
Can I just ask with Flipgrid?
Yes.
Is there an option so they don't see each other's videos?
I wondered about that the same as well, and I haven't found anything. What you can do, if you are very quick, you can, so all those green buttons they had, so if I just go back into that, you can make it frozen. So if I just share this one, you can actually make it, oh, it's in there anyway. You can make it frozen, so you can turn it from active to hidden, and then the other students can't see it.
Okay. Okay,
But
perfect.
that's the only way I found. Yeah, I wondered exactly the same question. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have a go. Thank you.
If you find a way, please do post.
Sure.
Yeah, because I'd love to know the answer.
I will.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of using Screencastify and Flipgrid? Can't students just submit a Screencastify, not go through Flipgrid?
The Flipgrid allows them to actually see each other's. So if you've got somebody who's pretty confident, they tend to put theirs on, and then those students who are a little bit more kind of hesitant, they can then have a look at probably what would be some good examples, and then they can make theirs better from that.
I see. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Of course, Lydia.
It also, Screencastify, I think, allows you to share your screen. Whereas when you're using Flipgrid to record your video, you are just, it just shows yourself, you know, speaking. So that's the difference. Sorry, you can hear the drilling going on in the background.
Yeah, the combination of Screencastify with Flipgrid is pretty cool in getting them to share their screen and share with each other. So formative assessment, I think, is as collaborative as we can make it is great before they do the summative assessment where they are completely then on their own. So I've done a Padlet, and I've started to put on some things there. So you'll be able to access this when it gets sent out by Kate from Nord Anglia. And so if you can just start with when you can use it, what the name is, and then what it's about, and just add that on there. So it's super easy. If you're on a computer, you just double click and a new one comes up. And to go into that Padlet, you can also use the QR code. And it would be great if you could give us some feedback on this webinar. This is my first ever webinar. I've done some training face-to-face in a classroom with a group of colleagues, which is infinitely easier than doing it on a computer screen. So if you could give us some feedback from there using the link or the QR code, that would be absolutely great. So I'd just like to finish with asking if there's any ideas that people would like to share with us now. And feel free if you need to drop off at any time, it's fine. Any other suggestions or questions? Okay, that's great. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. This is it's been pretty exciting to put this together. So it's added a little bit of excitement while I'm working from home. So please give us your feedback, and thank you very much for those of you that asked questions and participated. So please do use that Padlet, because it would be great. We all learn together. We all do better when we're all collaborating. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.